Good morning. I'm John Fishwick with Fishwick Associates, and today we have a very incredibly special guest, Senator Tim Kaine, who's in the House. He's got a lot of familiarity with the Star City. He needs very little introduction. He's a United States Senator, former governor, former lieutenant governor, mayor of Richmond. But before all of that great success, he was an incredible civil rights lawyer, and civil rights work is near and dear to my heart and our firm's heart. We represent a lot of folks who looking to enforce their constitutional rights in courts. So we're just greatly honored to have you here today in your busy schedule to spend a few moments with you talking about civil rights and some of the things that are happening in our country. So Senator Kaine, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, John, I'm glad to be with you. Your firm is great. You're a friend. And as you point out, I love Roanoke. In fact, the picture that's behind me right here is my inauguration as governor, where I'm standing with my wife, who grew up on Avonham Avenue in Roanoke. And
nice.
We always love being in Roanoke, and we have a lot of friends and family there. So I'm glad we could have this visit today.
Absolutely. Well, you're in the Star City virtually, and we're grateful for that. So Zach will ask our first question. Zach was with me when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Senator Kaine, I think near and dear to your heart. Zach's our firm investigator, but he was a Marine in a former life. And so Zach will get you to lead it off.
Yes, sir. Well, Senator, you were a lawyer in a past life and a civil rights lawyer. And with all that's going on right now, I was just wondering, what in your mind was the most important case you worked on?
You know, Zach, I worked on some big cases, but I think that's like a Rorschach question. You're just supposed to say the thing that comes to your mind. I think it was my first case. Okay. Which wasn't a big case and nobody knew about it, but it taught me a very important lesson. I was a brand new lawyer. I'd been at my firm for 2 months. And you know what happens when you're the new person and a do-good project comes in? Well, who's the new person? Give it to him. And it was a young woman named Lorraine who was almost just like me, moved to the new city, got the new job, just like me, went out to find an apartment, just like me. But when she tried to find an apartment, she was invited to come. When she called, there was an opening, but when she got there, the landlord said, "Oh, I'm sorry, the apartment has been rented in the last 2 hours." And she just didn't feel right about that. She thought something was wrong. So she went back to her office and had a coworker call and ask if it was open. The landlord said, "Yeah, it's open." And she realized she had been turned away because of the color of her skin. Now, this was an open and shut case. I mean, because I had the evidence and I had the witness and I filed the lawsuit and we settled it. But unlike cases I did that were, $100 million jury verdicts or, set precedents, this one was really important to me because it made me think that Lorraine was just like me in so many ways, except for the color of her skin. And for me, moving to a new city and taking a new job and finding an apartment was like an exciting thing. I'm, going out and being an adult, and there's a big wide world out there. And I didn't have any trouble with that. But for her, she had this negative experience where she was turned away because of her skin color. And then it would forever make her wonder in the future, when she looked for her next apartment or when she went out to buy a house, she would have a question in her mind. Is that going to happen to me again? Am I going to get treated badly because of the color of my skin? And there was sort of it just was sort of a there but for the grace of God go experience that made me decide, okay, I'm going to be a fair housing lawyer. And then for the rest of my 17 years, that was about 2/3 of my practice. But I think she just taught me a lot and gave me a determination to do the kind of work that I ended up doing and that I'm doing in other ways even today.
Outstanding. Thank you, Senator. I mean, not that wasn't insignificant, but like you said, it wasn't the biggest case you've done, but it's the one that had the most impact.
Yes.
So Kerin Daly is a graduate of North Cross School, senator here in Roanoke, and a recent graduate of William & Mary, where she did very well academically, and she is headed towards law school. And
excellent.
So, Kerin, why don't you ask the senator the next question?
Yes. How did the work you did as a civil rights lawyer kind of help you in politics? You kind of talk about how you continue that work today and how's that helped you?
Yeah, Kerin, in a lot of ways. So my political career was sort of an accident, even though my wife was from a very political family. I was a civil rights lawyer in Richmond doing fair housing work for 10 years, really loving that. I thought that was going to be my entire career. But my civil rights work kind of got me into politics, and then it's helped me along the way. My city, the city of Richmond, I mean, we got a lot of scar tissue, right? I mean, capital of Confederacy, we got a lot of scar tissue. And I was a civil rights lawyer. We go to a predominantly African-American church, and I felt like the Richmond rank and file people got along really well, actually. But at the leadership level, I saw too much division, racial division among the city's leaders at the time on our city council. On controversial issues, you know, white council members would vote one way and African-American council members would vote the other way. And so I was sort of a naive 35-year-old thinking, well, I think I can do better. And so I ran against an incumbent and barely won. But I had a very diverse district. And a lot of people were like, well, you know, in the African-American community, I mean, Monument Avenue, where all the civil rights, Civil War statues was in my district, but also Gilpin Court, which is the largest public housing community between DC and Atlanta, was in my district. And a lot of folks in the African-American neighborhoods in my district were like, well, you know, we don't know this guy, but we can see what he's been doing on the civil rights stage, and we feel like maybe he'll be a good advocate for us. And so certainly my civil rights background helped. My colleagues chose me to be mayor after my second term on city council. Majority African-American city council. When whites were the majority in Richmond, they never let an African-American be mayor, never, for 200 years, never. The African-American community had only been the majority in Richmond for 20 years, but they were like, this guy can be mayor. That was humbling. It was humbling to realize that a grace that the white community was never able to extend to an African-American. That community, the African-American community, was willing to extend to me. So again, my civil rights background helped them have that confidence in me. And then, you know, now as a governor first of a very diverse state, and now as a senator at a time of incredible pain, real pain around civil rights issues. You know, I keep thinking that I understand these things, but I keep learning new things. I'll tell you, I've learned something new in the last month. My views about the statues in Richmond. During my era of service as a city councilman and mayor, my contribution in these statues was to put up a lot of statues of African Americans whose stories had never been told. Arthur Ashe, Maggie Walker, to rename buildings after Oliver Hill, who has a great Roanoke connection too. Our generation was sort of trying to tell a fuller story and recognize people who'd never been recognized. I always looked at the Confederate statues as an evidence of a painful past, but that we sort of ought to keep up, if only to remind ourselves that that really was us, and people who were esteemed leaders nevertheless did things wrong. But recently, in the last month, as I've talked to an awful lot of my African-American friends in Richmond, they've heard me say it that way. They're evidence of a painful past, and we ought to remind ourselves of that. They said, yeah, for you, they're evidence of a painful past, but for us, they're about the present. For us, they're even about the future. As we see COVID deaths disproportionately African-Americans, as we see job losses, as the unemployment rate has tripled disproportionately African-Americans, we don't think these statues are about the past. We think a society that chooses to keep them up and honor them and all of that are communicating a message about the present, and it's a message that is demonstrated in the evidence as you look at everything. So, I think we have to challenge ourselves not to get set in our ways and listen to people and be open to new understanding. And I think my civil rights background helps me do that, but it certainly doesn't give me all the answers. I still need to listen to people and hear from them to understand perspectives that maybe I didn't get, yesterday.
That's powerful, Senator. And obviously Richmond is undergoing tremendous kind of discussions about these issues that are vital, not just to Richmond, but to Virginia, but to the country. And I think as relates to the statutes, they're leading our country in a different direction on that. And I think it's powerful, and I think there's consensus that they need to come down,
We just had a vote. I would not have predicted this, but we just had a vote in the Armed Services Committee 2 days ago to rename the 10 bases that are named after Confederate generals. And, the Marines, Jackson Marine, the Marine Commandant had earlier sort of issued an order that way. the DOD had indicated they were open to that after maybe originally not being so open to it. And so Senator Warren introduced the amendment, and I co-sponsored it. And we got a voice vote with only one no vote. Interestingly enough, within an hour, President Trump was tweeting that it was a bad idea. But you know, I read to my colleagues, some of them were unconvinced, but I read to my colleagues what Robert E. Lee said about statues. Robert E. Lee said, you shouldn't do statues to Confederates or the Confederacy. He made an exception for markers on graves, but he said the nations that have been through civil wars, they've gotten over it by not, you know, celebrating the division. Removing the symbols of division are the way to heal going forward. And most of my colleagues had not known that that was Robert E. Lee's position. Of course, Fort Lee is one of the 10 bases. 3 of them are in Virginia that are named after Confederate generals. And when I read the Robert E. Lee quote to my colleagues, they were pretty surprised. And that was what led it to be a virtually unanimous vote.
Yeah, I think these are important. And then I think it's important, the consensus that you're building on these issues, you know, so that people, we can come together as a country on some of these things. I think it's important. And I think that's, you know, Senator, you're in a position to impact so many things, but for the average person, the person who maybe watches this, and with all these issues that are springing up, but particularly as relates to civil rights and some of the things that we've been talking about today, what can you recommend for us, for we're average folks, and for our viewers, what can we do to help?
There's a lot you can do. So, you know, I think you work in your corner. So I'm on some committees. I'm on health, education, labor, pension. So the health and educational disparities are really important. I'm on the armed services committee. So things like, you know, my amendment to not allow the military to be used against peaceful protesters, that also passed bipartisan, or the renaming of Confederate bases. Here's something that is really good that you can do at the community level to deal with policing issues. And this is like not a stick, it's a carrot, you know, because sometimes we get into reform and then it's immediately like, we got to crack down. And I'm the sponsor of a big police reform bill that's got 31 sponsors in the Senate. But here's something that I think is a positive. No one goes to a university that's not accredited. And if a university loses accreditation, they usually lose federal funding, like Pell Grants and things like that. Somebody asked me the question the other day. I was talking to a police chief, and she wanted to make a point, and she said, why do we have universities be accredited, but we don't ask law enforcement agencies to be accredited? There is an accrediting agency that was started in 1979 called CALEA, the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation, that was designed to be sort of high standard, raise the professional standard of police organizations from state police to university police to, you know, towns and cities. It's voluntary, and most agencies don't do it. But for those that do, they go through a fairly rigorous accreditation process, and then they have to get re-upped every few years. And they look at things like, hey, who do you have on the force who's been disciplined multiple times but is still out there, you know, policing on the street? Is that the right way to do this? This organization was established to raise standards in police departments. It's been around for 40 years. It's headquartered in Virginia, Gainesville, Virginia, and Prince William. It has a 21-member board of law enforcement and local officials. One of the board members is a Virginian, the chief of the Ashland Police Force. In Virginia, the Virginia State Police is accredited, but the Richmond Police is not. The Suffolk Police is accredited, but many other police departments haven't even attempted it. In Minneapolis, where we've seen the horrible instances with George Floyd, it probably won't surprise you, neither the Minneapolis Police Force nor the Minnesota State Police are accredited. This isn't the complete solution, but to say to a local mayor or city council or county board of supervisors, hey, why don't you get your police force or your sheriff's department accredited? That would give us a little bit more confidence in the increasing professionalism of what's done. That's something that can be done at the local level. We don't need to pass a federal statute to do it. You just need local officials to say, you're right, that would be helpful. If we expect it of institutions like schools, why wouldn't we expect it of institutions like law enforcement departments? And the police chiefs who have gone through accreditation, I just talked to the police chief of Durham, North Carolina, who's been through it recently. said, look, it wasn't easy, and there were some uncomfortable things that they came back to us with, but it was really an important thing for us to do, and she was very satisfied that she had taken her community that direction. So that might be something that could be done in Roanoke. I don't know the status of, the Roanoke police or other police in the region, but I'm now recommending this to mayors and others around Virginia as a concrete step that can be taken. It's not just sticks, but actually, taking advantage of the desire we should all have to improve.
Well, the good
It's
thing,
got the
Senator,
advantage of being transparent and uniform. And Zach,
Yep.
besides being a Marine, why don't you follow up on that, Zach? Besides being a Marine, also has a history of, Zach's a jack of all trades, also was in law enforcement.
Excellent.
and we were accredited, sir, here in Roanoke, nationally
Oh,
accredited. Yes, sir.
that's fantastic, Zach.
I had actually injured my knee while on duty and was assigned to accreditation during my recovery. So I know exactly what you're talking about through all the process that you need to go through and maintain on top of that. It's not
Right.
one and done. And I mean, we were really strict on it. So I think that's great. If you can push that through, I know a lot of some of the other police chiefs, I'll probably get a call and sheriffs will say, what the heck are you saying, Zach? But I mean, you just have to. I mean, everybody can do it. They'll say it's a budget issue, but it's really not. We didn't have the budget. We just had to move some pieces and parts around and take stuff away from other things, and we made it happen. And we're better for it now. So, or were.
Zach, when you were in the Marines, what was your MOS?
0311, sir, and then I transferred to a reconnaissance scout.
Got it. Okay, good deal.
Thank you, sir. So, John?
Kerin, do you want to follow up with another question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
You kind of talked about on a more individual level, kind of the civil rights laws. What about the national levels? What types of changes do you support on a more national level?
So, boy, how much time do you have, Kerin? So I think, we do need to do this policing reform bill. I think it's a critical civil rights issue, and it has a number of components, banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants in most cases, some reforms of liability standards, certainly more training. We can even provide resources. Why not provide resources to agencies that want to do accreditation? If budget is an issue, we might be able to help with that. So there's a series of things there that are important. Voting is still very, very important. I'm really worried about voter disenfranchisement, and there has been an effort ever since the Supreme Court's decision in the Shelby case to reinstate the voting rights protections that were provided by the pre-clearance provisions of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Sadly, that was an act that at every step along the way was bipartisan. In fact, when it passed in 65, it was more of the Republicans than the Democrats that got it to pass. Every time it's been re-upped, it was always bipartisan until the era of Obama. And once we got there, the Republicans, after the Shelby decision, wouldn't get on with re-upping the Voting Rights Act. There's a really simple way to do that. Statutorily, it's quite easy and very fair. In fact, I'll go into this since I got lawyers. The part of the Voting Rights Act that was struck down in the Shelby case was the requirement that certain jurisdictions, mostly in the South, that had some history of racial discrimination, official racial discrimination, had to pre-clear changes to voting booths, precincts, dates of elections, etc. The Supreme Court in Shelby said, just because 1965 these communities had a history doesn't mean you can just assume that it's still those communities in 2020 or 2015 when the case was decided. And so they struck it down because they thought that geographic explanation was sort of archaic, but they left it to us to fix it. Bobby Scott, my wonderful Virginia colleague in the House, has said, you're right. You shouldn't just say Southern communities are bad. Here's what should happen. Any community that has had a voting rights complaint that has been a legitimate one in the last 15 years has to get things pre-cleared. Once you're 15 years past a problem, you no longer have to get anything pre-cleared. So it's not punishing the South, which in some instances now there's Southern communities that have done much better at electing minorities to be mayor or governor or to other offices than communities in the North or the Midwest. So let's stop penalizing the South. Let's just say if you've had a problem, then you have to pre-clear for a period of time until you're out from under the shadow of the problem. That's fair. It's even-handed. but we can't get Republicans to co-sponsor. That's a really important thing. We need to do the update of the Voting Rights Act. I think that's very, very important. And then another one that I think is important, and I'll give props to Virginia, because Virginia did this year. At the federal level, it's called the Equality Act, and it would go into every civil rights statute and just add LGBT, sexual orientation, or gender expression as a protected class. Right now, we have hate crimes legislation at the federal level that does protect people from hate crimes based on sexual orientation, but we have employment cases, public accommodation, housing. We have all these other statutes that do not protect LGBTQ people. And so the Equality Act would basically just go into all of them and add sexual orientation as a protected class. And I think that would be a really important one. And I'm glad that Virginia did that. And that becomes effective on July 1st.
Well, whenever I'm with Senator Kaine, it's just, your passion for these topics is amazing. And and your interest in your intellectual bandwidth, which is phenomenal on these issues, is so important for folks in our state. The one thing I'd like to end with, Senator, is I think probably the last 4 months have been some of the toughest time, at least in my lifetime, that our country has faced. What have you seen? What can you say to folks that you've seen or heard about in the last 4 months? Because I know you by nature an optimist. That gives you optimism for the future of our country, something that you kind of hold on to, that gives us some hope that on the other side of all these challenges, there's goodness coming. And I wonder if you could share something with us.
Sure. Well, John and I are friends, and I was so proud to work with Mark Warner, get John appointed U.S. Attorney, and he knows me pretty well. And one thing he knows is Warner consistently complains that I'm too optimistic about everything. Yes. But he and I we hit an average, because he's maybe slightly more pessimistic than he should be. This has been a time where, look, my natural optimism, I got to say, it's been challenged. And I will give you a personal, spiritual answer, and then I'll give you an observation from society answer. So a story that is a wonderful story that's in the Old Testament, and it's an important story for Christians, Jews, and Muslims, because it's in the Quran too, is the story of Job. And, whatever you believe about these stories, that they're inerrant and 100% true, or that they're literary lessons written thousands of years ago, they carry some really powerful wisdom. And the book of Job is a really interesting one. So this is my spiritual insight, and then I'll give you my evidence from society. So Job is about, why does suffering happen? Everything's going great for Job, and then he starts to lose everything. And, one thing after the next. And Job is like, hey, wait a minute, I've been a great person. Why is all this bad stuff happening? Is the universe pointless? And Job's neighbors say, look at all this bad stuff that's happening. We thought he was a good guy, but clearly he must be being punished for things he's done wrong that we don't know about. Now, those are two standard interpretations of why do things go bad for an individual or for society. Maybe it's just pointless. Or maybe things are going bad because you're being punished because you've done bad. But the reader of the story knows that neither of those are the answer. The reader of the story knows that there's a bet between the God and the devil about Job. Hey, Job's such a great guy. And the devil says, yeah, but he's only great because he has everything. If he lost stuff, he would abandon his faith, and he'd abandon his principles, and he wouldn't be such a great guy. All right, well, let's test him and see. The reader of the story knows he's being tested. And so I try to remember that sometimes when you're going through a challenging time. It may not be that the universe is pointless or you're being punished for something you did wrong. You're being tested. Will you remain true to your principles? In Job's case, it was his religious faith. But in the United States' case, will we retain true to all are created equal? And a free press is a good thing. And we're a nation of immigrants. And, freedom of religious expression, and nobody gets kicked around because of the religion. Are we going to remain true to those things or not? Well, the Job story ends with, he's not happy, by losing everything, and he kind of argues with God, but he won't let go of his principles. And so then at the end, it all turns around, and what he loses, he gets restored. And there's a powerful lesson in that. So I think sometimes in moments like this, you have to look at challenges and just say, okay, we're being tested. I hope we pass the test. We're more likely to pass the test if we hold true to values that are good values. the other piece is the evidence that I see. You know, when people participate, things go better. When Virginians turn out in elections, you know, we end up passing the Equality Act or ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment or doing something finally about gun safety. When people choose not to participate, hey, look, I was on a national ticket in 2016 and tens of millions of people just chose not even to vote. I mean, I have less worry about 63 million who voted for the opposing ticket than I do the tens of millions who says, it's not worth my time. I'm not even going to vote. So what I see, and then I see this in these young people who are protesting these days too. They're engaged and they're participating. And here is a really cool historical lesson about our Constitution. The Constitution got a lot of things right, and it got a lot of things wrong. You can't just completely praise a document that said an African American was worth 3/5 of a human being. There was a lot that was wrong there, but there was a lot that was right in there. And here's a fascinating insight that the framers knew in 1787. They knew that voting would not be enough to preserve our democracy. Now, they clearly wanted people to vote. Of course, they restricted the franchise back then, and we've broadened it, thank God. But they understood election of the president, election of Congress. They got that. But if voting were enough, they wouldn't have put in the First Amendment that people have a right to peacefully assemble, that people have a right to petition their government for redress of grievances. If they believe that, hey, listen, voting will solve this, just turn out every 2 years and elect leaders. If you don't like them, put new ones in. If they thought that would have been enough to preserve democracy, they never would have explicitly protected in the First Amendment, and it's first for a reason, and by protecting it, they're encouraging it. They never would have said, you got to be able to peacefully assemble. You have to be able to petition government for redress of grievances in addition to voting. And if you don't do those things, we're not going to be the society that we need to be. So as I see, you know, protests, and overwhelmingly peaceful. There are some people who engage in violence and looting, and I'm completely against that. But I'm more focused on, even at a time of intense pain, overwhelmingly people are doing this in an orderly and peaceful way. They are doing exactly what the framers knew needed to be done in combination with elections and votings if we were to be the kind of country that we needed to be. And so that gives me hope.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That was well said.
Senator, you know, it's been an incredible honor for us to get to chat with you today. We know how busy your time is, and you know, you always know that in the Star City, there's an open door for Senator Tim Kaine to come to our small law firm who does civil rights work, to talk to us anytime about any topic. But we're also so grateful for the work that you're doing for all of us, you know, individually and collectively. And we have confidence in our government, knowing that you're there. And just again, thank you so much for being here today, and keep up all the wonderful work you're doing for our country.
Well, John, I can't wait to get back down. I'm just starting to do some traveling around the state again after this time of trying to, not get sick or make other people sick. And so I look forward to being in Roanoke soon and seeing you guys. And thanks for everything you do to help out everyday people who need your help.
Well, thank you, Senator. And I mean, we really appreciate it. It was an honor. I truly mean that. I hope your family will stay safe, especially your son, Ura. And as always, to our readers, we encourage you to comment on what you heard here today, like, and please subscribe. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Kerin. John, see you soon.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Bye-bye.